So I wanted to talk a little bit today about some of the changing ideas and attitudes about the instruction of writing in the United States, and a couple of specific ways that I've been really focusing on helping my students improve their writing skills. And as Dr. Fatima had said, helping students overcome a lot of that kind of fear and anxiety that writing can often create for them. Let me see here. I'm going to step back here. So, real quickly on the screen, I think at least for me, on the left side here is what I like to imagine when I give my students a writing assignment. This is what I tend to imagine is going to happen. Right? They're going to go through this kind of wonderful writing process, the kind of writing process that I like to think I go through as well, with lots of drafts, with lots of revisions, with lots of markup, and it's a very kind of energetic and engaging process. I think more realistically, and the research shows us, and I think anecdotal evidence shows us as well, that more often what happens when a teacher assigns a writing assignment, what happens is what we see on the right here, with students experiencing some kind of fear, some kind of stress, maybe even some panic over the assignment itself. Right? And what a lot of the research is showing us, first of all, is that a big part of the problem is an overemphasis on that final product, right? We talk about these assignments and we say, this is what the students need to produce, right? This is what we want to see in the end. We want to see this 10-page research paper. We want to see this 20-page thesis, whatever it may be, right? And the students open up their computers or sit down at their desks with a pad of paper and they stare at that kind of blankness, right? And they don't even know where to start. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is finding ways to focus more on the process of writing so that students can ease some of that stress, as well as focus more on the actual learning process that takes place while we write. Again, I think one of the big problems is we focus on that final product as this is what I did and a demonstration of what I'm capable of doing, as opposed to thinking about the fact that any writing assignment is an opportunity to practice and improve our writing skills. So just to give a little context, I went to college in the 90s here in the United States at a little school called Webster University in kind of smack dab in the middle of the country. Right? One of my favorite professors, I took way too many classes with him, was this gentleman, Dr. Harry James Cargus, who's was a world-renowned scholar of the Holocaust. That stack of books is a selection of the books he either wrote or edited over his 40-year career. Like I said, I really loved Dr. Harry's classes. They were really interesting to me. He always had great things to say. He was a very traditional professor, though. He was the kind of professor who got up in front of the class and spoke for the full 4 hours of the class, right? Because he would teach these evening classes that were always just once a week for 4 hours. And he was very traditional, right? And part of that tradition was that he would give us these kinds of assignments that you can see here on the screen. So about half of our course grade was made up based on this one sentence of an assignment, which is write a 10 to 15 page researched analysis of one of the novels we've read this semester. So these were all literature classes, right? And whether we were taking a class on the work of Elie Wiesel or of Kurt Vonnegut or of some other authors, right? This was the assignment. And like I said, it made up about half of our semester grade, right? So it was a big, big, important assignment. And a lot of students panicked at this, right? And you can imagine why, because we realize, even though he doesn't even write it here, that half of our course grade is going to be the result of this thing we have to turn in at the end of the semester. And kind of the problem here is we didn't get any instructions about this. Right? Now, I kind of knew, for a variety of reasons, what Dr. Harry was expecting from us, right? I knew it because I took a lot of classes with him. And so I did badly on the first time. I kind of learned the next time going around what he was looking for. But I also had certain advantages when I went to college, right? Both of my parents went to college, right? My mother was in graduate school when I was in college, right? So I kind of grew up with this idea of higher education and what was expected of students in higher education. But a lot of students, and again, we're really starting to finally focus on this in the United States, a lot of our students don't come to college with that context. We talk about them as being underrepresented. We sometimes talk about them as being underprepared students. I'm not a big fan of that term because it suggests that it's kind of their fault, and it's not their fault, right? It's the society they've grown up in hasn't done a good job of preparing them for it, right? So when Harry would give us these assignments, some of us would see these and panic because we didn't know what he was looking for. And some of us who were better prepared would look at these and we'd start to be able to read through the lines, right? And we would realize that what Harry was asking for when he said a term paper was that he wanted something according to Modern Language Association requirements, right? Which we use in English, right? With citations. When he said 10 to 15 pages, he wanted typed double-spaced pages, and he really wanted 15 pages because Harry might have said 10 to 15, but he really meant 15. Right? When he said researched analysis, what he meant was he wanted us to engage in literary criticism. He wanted us to go out and do research with other literary scholars, right, and bring in their articles and their comments, right, and engage with them, right? When he said we were talking about a book we read in class, that meant he wanted us to pull a lot of the concepts and ideas we talked about in class into the paper, right? So he wanted us to demonstrate for him that we were paying attention during those class discussions and his lectures, right? And then we also knew, or we learned, or I knew, right, after taking him a couple of times, that when he said the deadline was April 25th, that was just kind of a soft deadline. I could go to him and I could say I was really busy that week, and he'd say, well, okay, turn it in on May 2nd, right? He didn't say any of those things in the assignment though, right? And so for a new student or a student who doesn't know that they can go talk to the professor, right? Or doesn't know what's kind of expected of them, all of that's hidden. All of that's a secret, right? And that's part of the panic that often happens with students with writing. It's they don't even know where to begin. And so they can't even get started. So this is Dr. Marianne Winklemas. She is the executive director for the Center for Teaching and Learning at Brandeis University here in the United States, right? And for the past 10 years ago, she's been doing research on this idea that she calls transparency in learning and teaching, right? And you can see there's a website down there, tilthighered.com, where she's got all of her research and materials up there. Her research has focused very specifically on helping faculty avoid that kind of panic and fear inducement for students, right? And what she has found is if we give 3 specific kinds of information on our assignments, we can help students shift their focus. And what she's really focusing on is this idea we talk about in the States called the hidden curriculum, which is the stuff that professors assume students know, and that we're finally starting to pay attention to the fact that the students don't know it, right? Especially those students who haven't come from families with experience in college, right? And at a school like Xavier, where Dr. Ahmed and I teach, right? A large portion of our students are what we call first generation students, right? Nobody in their family has ever gone to college before, right? So nobody in their family has ever been able to talk to them about what college is going to be like or what's going to be expected of them at college, right? And so they come to us without that kind of support system in place. They often also come to us from high schools that are inadequately funded, right? Or that have focused too much on testing as opposed to writing, right? So they come to us with a lot of challenges. And again, not their fault, right? But it's kind of the culture in which they've grown up is lacking, right? It's the society's problem, right? And so we're trying to address that. And this idea of transparency really benefits those students in particular, right? What Dr. Winklemas's research has found is that students, when given certain pieces of information on an assignment ahead of time, right? Not only do they do better on the assignment itself, but they have greater self-esteem in the course, right? They have a greater sense of belonging as a college student as well. And again, this is one of the big challenges for those underrepresented students that we have at Xavier in particular, right? Which is they don't feel like they belong. They don't feel like they should be there, right? And again, that's not their fault. That's what kind of the message they're getting, right? So three things. I'm going to go through these kind of quickly, but I'll be glad to answer some more questions about them later. First of all, Dr. Winkleman says you need to give a purpose statement about the assignment. You need to explain to the students. We need to explain to the students why we're having them write an assignment in the first place, right? And again, if you think back to what Dr. Harry used to give us, he didn't bother to say. It was just do this. Right? Here's what you're going to produce for me, right? But if we tell the students the skills and the knowledge they're going to work on and demonstrate through that assignment, they have a better understanding of what's expected of them, right? And so they're already thinking about not what's that final product going to look like, but what do I need to focus on as I put this paper together? Is research important? Are citations important? Is, a certain kind of structure important, right? Is a certain kind of writing important, right? And another piece of information that really helps them is to talk about how this writing will help them in the future, right? Because again, a lot of us kind of understand that when I give a student a writing assignment, the student says, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get a grade, and then that's the end of the transaction, right? But what we want to say is, if you work on these skills with this writing assignment, it's going to help you in your other classes, it's going to help you when you go to grad school or professional school, it's going to help you when you get a job, right? So if we can talk about those things, it motivates the students and helps them better understand what we're asking them to do. The second thing we want to do is make sure we tell the students what we expect them to do in the first place, not the end goal, right? But the steps we want them to take to get to that end goal, right? Where should they start, right? Do they need to do some research? Do they need to do some brainstorming? Do they need to look at certain materials? Do they need to bring in certain kinds of sources? Right? Again, if we assume they know that, we're causing them that panic, right? That sets in, right? That Dr. Fatima talked about, right? If we tell them ahead of time, this is what we want you to do, or this is what I don't want you to do. Often what I'll do is I'll tell students, don't start with this, right? Start with this, right? And so again, telling them what steps we would take as a writer would greatly benefits them as well, right? We also want to think about this idea of what we call alignment, which is if we're asking them to do something, how does that fit with that purpose statement we gave them, right? If we're asking them to do research, how does that fit with the skills we said they were going to work on, right? And if we can't make that match, we need to kind of reformulate the assignment a little bit. The final piece is we want to make sure, and again, if you remember Dr. Harry's assignment, we need to tell students how they're going to be graded on this assignment, right? I used to get those papers back from him, and it would have like a big number written in blue ink on the back with a circle around it, and that was my grade. 87, 92, right? 74, whatever. And I had no idea, again, even with my preparation, I had no idea how he got that number in the first place. What did that number represent? What did I do wrong, right? Why isn't it 100, right? If we tell them ahead of time, this is how I'm going to grade you, right? And if the students understand going in, right, this is how you're going to be graded, right? They know what to focus on with the assignment, right? If I tell them they're going to be graded on the quality of their citations, they know they need to focus on their citations. If I tell them they're going to be graded on the quality of their writing, they know to focus on the quality of their writing, right? But if I don't tell them those things in the first place, they're not going to know. And again, that not knowing is a big part of the problem of the fear that sets in with those writing assignments. So I wanted to give you a real quick example of what this might look like, because a lot of times when I talk to faculty about these ideas, because I'm spending a lot of time at my school trying to encourage faculty to think about their assignments in these ways. It's not a whole lot more than we might do. It's more than what Dr. Harry would have done, right? Because he did one sentence, right? But so I'm going to show you real quickly here, right? What one of these assignments might look like. And I'm going to need to stop sharing my screen real quickly so I can switch over here. So this is an assignment. Let me enlarge it a little bit. So I teach a class every couple of years called the graphic novel and social justice. Right, I teach it with a colleague of mine in the art department named Gus Jenkins, and we focus on helping students think about how comics and comic books, which are often seen as these kind of frivolous, non-literary, non-consequential texts, can actually have a profound statement to make, especially in terms of questions of justice and social justice. Right? And what we want students to do is be able to kind of look at those texts, not as, well, this is what the art looks like and this is what the writing looks like in two separate ways, but we want to teach them to think about those things together. So you can see in this purpose statement, we tell them real clearly, this is the skill you're working on for this assignment. And we know going in that students coming into our class have never, ever written an assignment like this. They've never seen a paper assignment like this before, right? So we know they have no idea what we're asking of them the first time they see this assignment.
Jason, sorry
yes,
for the interruption. I just want to make sure the audience, can you hear us?
Yes, sir.
You all can hear? Because
yes, we can.
Yes,
Yes, yes, we can.
yes,
I
sir.
got a message from somebody. Yeah. And,
Yes, Dr. Sayed, can you just make him, more clear? Because, he's not very audible.
Oh.
Can you
okay, maybe some background noise or something. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, there was some background noise.
Okay, just see that. Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, please kind of let me or Dr. Ahmed know if you're having a little bit of trouble hearing. There was some background noise going on for a little bit there. So are we good?
Yes, I can. Yeah, that's fine from here.
Okay. So we spend a lot of time talking about the purpose of the assignment, why we're asking them to do these, right? And you can see that kind of explanation both in terms of how it's going to benefit them in the class and how it's going to benefit them in their other classes as well, right? And then we spend some time talking about the actual assignment. Here's not what the final paper is going to look like, but here's the steps you need to go through in order to work on this. You need to read this text. You need to look at these sources, right? You need to think about these things and ask these questions. And then we give them how they're going to be evaluated, right? And so we use rubrics. I'm a real big fan of rubrics for grading, right? And giving the students the rubrics ahead of time, which basically says you're not getting just 100 points on this assignment, right? You're getting a certain number of points based on the quality of the writing of your paper. You're getting a certain number of points based on how well you bring in certain terminology and concepts, right? So I'm breaking it down for them. And then even saying, here's why you might get a slightly lower score for the quality of your writing, or here's why you make it a pretty bad score for that part of your writing, right? So the students, again, go in knowing what to focus on, right? And then when they get it back, they know not just that they got an 87%, right? But they know, well, I did really well on the writing, but I had a little bit of trouble with some of these other concepts. And so the next time I do one of these papers, because we have them do 4, right? They know where they need to put a little more focus and energy, or better yet, they know what they need to come talk to us about so that they can improve those. All right, I'm going to go back and share my original screen here. Let's see. Okay, so part of the challenge that faculty think about is realizing kind of the transactional nature of these writing assignments, right? We give the students an assignment, right? They put some words on the page. They give it to us and we grade it, right? And again, what the research has started to find, at least here in the States, is that a lot of students look at the grade and then they kind of toss the paper aside. If they don't necessarily throw it into the garbage can, they put it into a folder or their backpack or a box or something like that, and they never look at it again, right? And again, it's that focus on it's that focus on what am I getting out of this? I'm getting a grade out of this. And as soon as I've seen my grade, I don't need to think about this anymore. Right. And so again, a lot of these ideas that I'm talking about today can help kind of reshift the focus on what's most important, which is improving the writing skills of the students, right? This idea of transparency really helps focus on the process itself, right? And it says, here's what you need to put your energies into, not that final paper, right? But this, sorry, I'm sorry, I'm getting a good deal of static here.
Yeah.
Background noise.
One second. Can we? Let me see. Can you mute from your end? Let me see.
Yeah, I think I got everybody muted. Okay, so, and I think everybody can still hear me, I think. So transparency really helps focus on the writing skill, on the process, right? And it tries to reshift that focus on the process. Instead of saying, this is what you're going to turn into me on April 25th, it says, here's all the things you need to focus on before April 25th as you're working on this assignment. And again, what that does is allows the student to focus on improving those skills, right? Instead of staring at that blank page and trying to figure out how they're going to produce a wonderful 15-page paper. Right? We also want to think about ways we can get students, and that shifted a little too quickly for me. We also want to think about ways we can get students, or I really want to think about ways I can get students to move away from this belief that as soon as they turn in a paper for me or an assignment for me, they don't have to think about it anymore, that it becomes something that's inconsequential. They got their grade and then that's the end of it, right? I want them to think about their writing as something that goes on and continues, right? And again, I went to school and then I went to college in the 90s. I still have boxes full of the papers I wrote as a college student, right? But I haven't looked at them in 30 years, right? And I've actually finally started going through and kind of shredding them a little bit because I don't need them anymore, right? So another way that a lot of us are really starting to think about helping students think about writing again as a process and as an ongoing process, as opposed to here's the assignment, here's the grade you get for that assignment, right? Is to think about collaboration as part of the writing assignment itself. One of the reasons this has become a real focus here in the States is that we're starting to realize, I think a little bit late, right, that attitudes about why we go to college and what we're supposed to be getting out of college are changing, right? When my parents went to college in the 1960s, right, the general attitude was you went to college for a specific career that you had in mind, right? You graduated from college. Maybe you did a little bit of professional school or graduate school if you needed it, right? Then you got a job in that discipline, right? And then you spent 40 years working in that job, right? And again, like that's what somebody like my dad did, right? He went to college, right? As a pre-law student, he went to law school. Then he got out of law school. He got a job as a lawyer, right? And he spent 40 years working as a lawyer, right? And that was it, right? And that generation kind of thought that way, right? Our current generations, our younger students, the students who are in college now, right? In particular. So I've got a stepdaughter who's a sophomore in college, right? And so she's really thinking about these things, right? What we're realizing is that they don't have that same attitude, right? And part of the reason is because society is changing so rapidly, in particular because the technology is changing so rapidly, that we can't even really predict some of the jobs that these students are going to have in 10, 20, 30 years. And the likelihood is that they're going to have multiple jobs and even multiple careers now, right? They're not going to stay in one career for 40 years, right? We've kind of gotten a little restless with that, right? And so you can see some of these statistics here, right? 65% of students who are in school right now will work in at least one career that does not currently exist, right? And the 10 most in-demand jobs 10 years ago didn't even exist 6 years before that in 2004, right? And those numbers have just increased since then. So the challenge now is to say, how do you teach somebody to write for a career in college when we don't even know what that career is going to look like? We don't know what's going to be asked of them. We don't know the specific nature of that job, right? And so this idea that, well, we can just teach them to write as lawyers, like my dad was taught to write as a lawyer, right? That's not that useful anymore, right? And so we've got this bigger focus now on what we talk about as 21st century skills, right? Now, nobody's going to try to teach all these things in any one class, right? But the idea is to start trying to infuse some of these ideas into different parts of the curriculum for the students. And again, you'll notice that none of this is about kind of that disciplinary knowledge, right? All of this is about skills, right? Critical thinking and problem solving skills, oral and written communication skills, right? Teamwork and collaboration skills, technology skills, right? I like to really focus on these first four. They fit, I think, best with the kind of work I do and the kind of teaching I do, and they're also the kind of things I'm kind of most comfortable teaching, as well as my disciplinary kind of stuff, right? And again, you'll notice the difference, right? We're not focusing on that final product and saying students need to know how to write a poetry explication, right? It's fine if they do write it, but it's great if they learn how to write a poetry explication. But the end goal isn't that they know how to write a poetry explication. The end goal is that they know how to think critically. They know how to analyze a text, right? They know how to write about it or present about it, right? Maybe even that they can work together in doing it as well. So again, you see kind of the shift there, again, on skills, more so than on that disciplinary knowledge, right? And again, I think that's one of the big challenges we have. I have as an English teacher, right? Because most of our students aren't English majors, right? And so they come into my classes really uncomfortable with the idea of, I don't know how to write a literary paper. I don't know how to write a textual explication, right? And one thing I say to them is, well, it's just another form of writing, right? And we can work on the details of that unique kind of writing later, but let's focus on the writing right now. One way I've really started trying to do this, I've started in some of my classes having students work on Wikipedia assignments together. Right now, I don't know about you all and kind of some of the how Wikipedia is kind of embraced right there. A lot of my students come to me from high school, having been told by their high school teachers that Wikipedia is something horrible that they should avoid because it's full of misinformation and anybody can write anything, right? And while there are some problems with it, right, there are some really great resources out there as well, right? And if you learn how to work with the material, you can learn how to kind of interpret what's good and what's bad, just the same way you would with any other resource, right? But I like the students to actually work together to produce an article in Wikipedia, right? I mean, so this is an article that I had from 2 years ago from a class I taught. The students worked together, had 27 students in this class, and together they wrote this article on this neighborhood in New Orleans. New Orleans, the city of New Orleans is very kind of broken down by neighborhoods. We have these very kind of unique neighborhoods. So if you know anything about New Orleans, you've probably heard about the French Quarter. That's kind of the most famous, and that was the original neighborhood, right? But there's other neighborhoods as well, right? And Xavier, the university, sits in a neighborhood called Gert Town. And hardly anybody's ever heard of Gert Town. Even people from New Orleans haven't heard of Gert Town. And part of the reason is because it's a smaller neighborhood. It's a predominantly African-American neighborhood, and it's a predominantly lower income family neighborhood, right? And so it doesn't have kind of the cultural capital that something like the French Quarter does, right? And so what we did is we worked together over about 8 weeks and this about half a semester. And the students worked together. 27 students worked on this article together. And this wasn't kind of thing where you do this and you do this and you do this and we'll just all kind of stick it together. It was a truly collaborative process where everybody was working together so that we would have one seamless, clearly written and effective presentation about this neighborhood, right? So again, the collaboration challenges them to work together a little bit, right? And what happens with collaboration, obviously, is that it forces students to talk to each other about the processes they're going through when they're researching, when they're editing, when they're writing and revising, right? Because when they're working on an assignment by themselves, they don't have to talk to anybody about those processes, right? But when you're working on a writing assignment with 3 other people or 10 other people or 27 other people, right? You have to talk to them. This is why I'm doing this. This is why I think this looks better than this, right? And there has to be this constant dialogue that takes place. In the process, also, a lot of that stress is alleviated because instead of saying you're going to produce an article for Wikipedia, you're going to help produce an article for Wikipedia. So that collaboration becomes a form of support and scaffolding for the students so that, again, they can focus on those skills and improving their writing as opposed to just obsessing over that final product, right? The other thing this does is it gets rid of that idea of the final product because since it's on Wikipedia, it's a working document. It's a living document. It's never going to be done, right? It's constantly being changed. I was just doing some editing on it the other day, right? And I still have some other students from 2 years ago who like to come back and do some more editing on it as well, because there's always room for improvement. So again, what this really instills in the students is an understanding that writing is an ongoing evolutionary process that is never done. Right? They can always improve their writing. They can always improve their writing skills. The other thing this does is it puts it out there for the world. Instead of them writing an assignment for me that I'm going to grade, that they're going to look at and then never think about again, right? This is a product that they produced that is still out there, right? If you go to Google and search on Gert Town, this is the first hit. This is the first result that comes up. So somebody interested in learning about Gert Town is going to learn about Gert Town because of the work that these at the time college freshmen did at Xavier, right? And so they're contributing to this kind of global knowledge about the city of New Orleans, right? And this neighborhood in New Orleans, right? And giving them that purpose, that meaning, right? I think really changes their attitudes when it's not just, well, you're going to write something that I'm going to grade and then we're never going to talk about again, but you're going to help write something that your parents can see, your grandparents can see, your friends and family can see, that anybody in the world can see, right? That really kind of changes their attitude about the writing itself, right? And again, it helps them focus on the process of writing as opposed to that final product of the writing. One other, what happened to my, oh, sorry, that was an example. So that's the actual article, but let me switch back here to my presentation. One other real quick example I'll give you, and I want to go ahead and kind of start to wrap up a little bit because I realize there may be some questions. Another way I've done this collaboration process. Last year, I was teaching a class on dystopias, right? And so instead of having the students do Wikipedia articles or something like that, I had them work in small groups of about 3 or 4 people each, and they produced podcasts, right? So we had each group produced 1 episode. In the end, we had a series for the podcast with, I think, 10 episodes, right? So we had a full series for the podcast, right? Now they were still doing writing, right? They had to do the research, right? They had to write and edit and revise their scripts, right? They had to do it in a very different way because they had to write it in a way that sounded natural, right? And meaningful, right? As opposed to that much more kind of formal writing, right? And again, sometimes that formality challenges them a little bit, right? And so we can help them focus on their skills by pulling away from that formality, right? Instead of telling them they have to write a term paper, which carries, at least in the US, it carries a lot of weight for students, right? When you say you're going to write a term paper, that's a really kind of overwhelming thing, right? It's a very specific kind of thing. It's written in very kind of fancy, formal academic language, right? And then the students can't even focus on the individual sentences because they're thinking about, again, that final fancy product, right? By giving them a podcast, again, they can focus on the writing skills, right? And they understand what that can sound like a little bit better. It's going to sound like them, right? And again, Same thing with Wikipedia. This is a product that they created. Now, this isn't going to be constantly changing, right? This is up, but this is going to be up there forever, right? Or as long as I leave it up there, right? For anybody to download and listen to, right? And again, their friends, their family can listen to it. They can go back and listen to it. Potential employers can listen to it and see the work that they did, right? As students. So again, it's just another way. And again, the collaboration really challenges them to talk to each other about the process they're going through, right? And anytime you can get students to talk about the process they're going through, you're getting them to do a better job and realize how they can improve on that process. And again, we go back to that example from Dr. Harry I had, 30 years ago in college. He would give me that assignment sheet. I would go off to my dorm room, sit at my desk. I would write my paper by myself, right? I would never talk to anybody about it, right? He didn't do any kind of peer reviewing or anything like that. And then I would type it up, right? Because I was still working on a typewriter back then, right? I would turn it into him at the designated deadline, right? And about a week later, he would hand it back to me with that grade, and that was the end of it, right? I was showing him what I'd learned. I was showing him what I could do, but I wasn't really thinking about what I was learning in the process, right? And I wasn't talking to anybody about what I was learning in the process either, right? And collaboration really challenges students and helps students do that as well. I did just want to kind of mention the downside. One of the challenges I have with these two recent assignments I was talking about, Wikipedia and the podcast, is the challenge of technology. Now, currently, we're in kind of a unique situation, obviously, with the pandemic and being locked down as we were last spring, and then things loosening up a little bit. So there's a little more reliance on technology right now. But those kind of assignments, I need to be careful when I go into the class to make sure the students are going to have kind of reliable internet access that they can use for working on these things. I need to make sure that they've got a reliable computer they can use for these. Sometimes I have students come in and the only computer they've got is an old iPhone, right? And while they're useful, it's not a great way to write a college assignment on, right? So I do need to be careful of that and be cognizant of that. And collaboration is still possible without all that technology, right? You could still have students work on an assignment in class together and meet together outside of class, right? The technology's actually been an advantage the past year because of the pandemic and the lockdown we've been under. But I'll have to kind of rethink these things going forward in terms of technology and what I can expect students to have access to, right? Because a lot of our students, again, are coming from with a lot of financial challenges, right? And a lot of them, their parents are putting pretty much everything they've got into just the tuition, and then to expect them to have high-speed internet access or expect them to have a real nice laptop that they can tote around with them is a bit unfair, right? So I need to be careful of those things, right? But again, the collaboration is possible without all the technology, without the focus on technology. But I do like having that tech focus as well. And again, what all of this does, I think, is changes the student's attitude. So we go from this belief, it keeps doing that, of I give the assignment, they write the paper, and it goes away, right? They write the assignment, I give them the assignment, they write it, and it's shared with in this case, the world, right? And again, it changes their thinking about that. So just to kind of wrap up, right? This idea, I mentioned this idea of alignment real quickly, right? And ultimately, what I'm really trying to think about and sharing with you all is this idea that we need to focus on the process of writing instead of that final product of the writing, right? The product is important, but we need to help students understand how to get to that product. And we need to show them that they're actually learning things and improving things, right? It's not that you have to be a great writer in order to get an A, it's that you need to work on your writing. Doing this will help you become a great writer, right? They're in college to learn. They're not in college to show us what they already know. Right? And both these things emphasize, I think, process over product. I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. And I guess we'll ask if there are any questions.